how Trump brought this on himself. And because this is the reason criminal defendant Trump is now more likely to face trial, potential conviction, and potential prison than at any point in his 70-plus years on Earth. Now, the first piece, very simple. People who run for president try to formally announce their campaigns on the later side, typically about 6 months before the primary season begins, if you look at, say, some of the Republicans running right now. Now, most years, that's, say, around May or June before the election year. And we know the reason. There's a bunch of laws and campaign finance limits that only kick in once you formally declare. Take Republican Mitt Romney. He announced about 6 months out of the 2012 race. We checked. It was June 2nd, the year before the presidential election year. Now, Trump had talked up running for a long time leading up to 2016, but he followed the same pattern. He only formally announced his presidential campaign that cycle about 6 months out of the 2016 race. You may remember it was initially treated with quite a lot of questions when he went down the escalator and said he was running for president, and he followed that calendar pattern of other presidential cycles and other candidates in both parties, about 6 months out. This time was very different. Donald Trump jumped in far earlier and broke his own precedent, as I mentioned. And he, of course, rejected the widespread strategy that candidates use to avoid having those legal restrictions kick in. And we've seen Donald Trump certainly listen to, well, advisors with strategic counsel for how to avoid the rules or restrictions, which is one of the reasons we think he did it the normal 6-month way in 2016. And Trump didn't just jump in with a few more months this time. He announced 15 months out in November 2022, which made for this unusual precedent. It was the earliest presidential candidacy declaration in modern history, as Slate reported. And it was done at this home front gathering, sometimes panned as looking a little lackluster or even rushed.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Now, there was very, very early. Weird, unusual, early thing over here. And that's what brings us to the tragic flaw of Oedipus over here, because I can actually show you, it's pretty interesting, as I said, given what's happening, that there was reporting, clues, leaks, and analysts all discussing Donald Trump's exact unusual motivation.
I am curious about this very early announcement, and I'm wondering if you think that maybe Donald Trump is trying to beat the AG or any of the other legal officials, the DOJ, you name them.
Many people around the president who I spoke to were talking about his concerns about facing prosecution.
And you write in part, quote, a big reason Trump announced his run is he fears criminal prosecution. He's a desperate man, a threatened and rabid animal.
He's running to stay out of prison.
In private conversations, pretty blunt, that they see it as he has to win the election, and that is how he guarantees that he does not face jail time.
It's pretty amazing that when Trump ran in 2016, his slogan was lock her up, and in 2024, it's going to be vote for me or I'm going to go to jail.
This was widely discussed at the time, and some of those were objective, nonpartisan reporters discussing aides admitting it. Trump calculated that by rushing to become a candidate again, it would make it harder to indict him, that the move would put more heat on the DOJ, which had concerns it didn't want to look partisan, if it were to indict a now declared major challenger to the incumbent, President Biden. Now, it may be a Trump ploy, but it was rooted in very clear signs that Garland's DOJ and the FBI were resistant to opening probes into Trump's role, for example, on January 6th. And again, as we get into this tonight, I want to remind you, it's easy to sometimes forget how it was really common knowledge up to that point that the Garland DOJ was not really going up the line to indict Trump officials or Trump himself for January 6th.
Either Merrick Garland has a super secret investigation going on that nobody knows about, but he's got all the cards and he's ready to go, or it's the biggest failure of an attorney general in American history.
The idea that a year and a half after these events, they would not have talked to these witnesses is, I think, cause for great concern.
He said they waited 2.5 years to do this. They did. And that may be an inconvenient truth. It may be an understandable truth. We don't know as a public why that is the fact. But it is true that we waited 2.5 years.
2.5 years. That's Nicole and I talking about just last week. So this was in the water. You can see how Trump thought rushing out his announcement could reinforce that very dynamic at DOJ. Trump trying to outrun his fate. But like Oedipus, that very move completely backfired. And let me show you exactly why tonight, because it was only by announcing the early candidacy that the Attorney General appointed a new, dedicated special counsel to lead the Trump probes, bringing Jack Smith into the scene for the first time. It was formally triggered by one thing: Trump's early campaign announcement. Here was Garland just 3 days after what I showed you earlier, Donald Trump declaring that early bid for president.
I'm here today to announce the appointment of a special counsel in connection with 2 ongoing criminal investigations based on recent developments, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election. I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint a special counsel.
There you have it. And Garland had not been leading a DOJ that had, at that point, indicted any Trump official over January 6th, let alone the former president himself. That was the status quo that I mentioned, like that exhaustive Washington Post report on the lack of indictments, revealing that DOJ had a wariness about appearing partisan, internal clashes over how much evidence was sufficient to investigate the actions of Trump that drove and contributed to the slow pace. Once Smith took over, it went from slow to warp speed with indictments in the espionage case within 8 months.
Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
And then Jack Smith was back at it last week with the coup charges of defendant Trump.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies.
The facts show without Special Counsel Smith, DOJ was not on track to indict Trump. Without Trump's early campaign announcement, there's no Special Counsel Smith. It is the ultimate Greek tragedy. Donald Trump trying to outrun his fate and sealing it, playing himself. Now, that alone's interesting, right? You might say, okay, Ari, cool story or a tragic play, but if Trump was just delaying his campaign announcement, if that's the only quibble, then eventually, if Trump declared, wouldn't Garland use that same rule to appoint a special counsel and then the probe would heat back up, right? If this were like dinner party talk, that might be the rebuttal. Well, I have an answer to that for you too right now. No. Actually, according to our legal analysis, we can show you this new tonight. It's actually clear. You have there, Trump did his announcement early, back in November 2022. As I showed you, Jack Smith appointed just days after that. Then within 7 months, Smith indicts the Espionage Act violations in the Docs case, coup charges last week. And this is, as you can see, long before what's on the far right, the 2024 primaries. So Trump's early move actually gave Smith, who's clearly a fast worker, this early start of sorts, the 7 months you see, to do this work before getting anywhere near those primaries. That's what happened. And now we have a legal projection for you of the exact same timeline, those underlying facts, with the hypothetical. What if Donald Trump simply followed the typical calendar and his own past schedule instead of trying to game the system? Take a look. This is the hypothetical, your typical campaign calendar. I went through the examples. It's true in both parties. Typical announcement window is where we started instead, in the middle there. But if you do 7 months there, where do you wind up? If Smith took the same amount of time, which was fast, to jumpstart his work, well, then his 7 months for the first charge would land in December, literally weeks from the GOP primaries. And the timing for the coup charge would be after that in 2024, smack in the middle of that primary voting. The